Hello, I'm James,
Hi, I'm Jimmy,
and welcome to A Job Done Well.
the podcast that helps you improve your performance and enjoyment at work.
Good afternoon. What are we talking about today, then?
Afternoon, James. Today we are talking about managing people, the job nobody trains you for. A lot of middle managers are promoted because they're brilliant at their day job, whatever it is. They were outperforming and they get promoted to a job that requires a completely different set of skills from what they were good at. Nobody really trains you managing people, although, James, you always love managing people, don't you?
I'm going to be controversial about that one shortly.
Let's get to that in a second. But the skills that got you promoted stop being the ones that you need. Today, we are going to be talking about the moment that we realised that, what we did about it. And for you, James, it turned out that your Excel skills didn't really help when it was all kicking off in your team.
Excel skills don't help. Although I have to admit, I have never been promoted because I was brilliant at doing my job. So that bit was wrong as well. But let's move on.
Well, that's because you were never brilliant at doing your job. That was an obvious one to walk into. So I guess, when did you realise that when it came to managing people that you just didn't have a clue what you were doing?
I was lucky enough when I started work to work for an exceptionally good boss. And
Right.
Because of that, I think, and there will be people that are listening to this who work for me, who will no doubt be glad to disabuse me of this, but I don't think, other than a couple of horrors, which we'll come and talk about, I've ever been that bad. I've never had that, oh my God, I'm at my death moment, but it is because I had about 7 or 8 years of working for somebody who was really fantastic.
There must have been a moment, though, when you felt that you were a little bit out of your depth.
No,
matter how much arrogance you had.
No, because what you don't realise is nobody let me really manage people until I was 8 years in.
Fair enough. Well, personally, when I worked in betting shops, I was a really good cashier. I was brilliant. I got to the point where one of the things at the time that you judged yourself on was how many bets you could take in a day. And I could take 1,000 bets on my till. That was like unheard of. That's like what a shop did. And I got promoted to managing people. And I've always got on well with people. And I was okay. But the point I thought, hang on a minute, this is not quite as straightforward as I thought, was I was managing a betting shop in Chalk Farm. And I had this cashier, and she was probably like 20 years older than me, something like that. And I was only like 19, I think, at the time. Anyhow, she kept on coming in late. And I found it really difficult. I was trying to explain to her this was a problem. She's coming in late. And she did it regularly. And it was risky because you couldn't open your shop on your own for fear of being robbed. So there was a security angle to it. And in the end, I had to get my supervisor down to talk to her about it because I just couldn't get through to her. Two things that brought it home to me. One, I couldn't get through to her that me explaining nicely about being late was a problem. Two, when she sat down with my supervisor, she turned around and said that she was never late. And it was because I opened the shop early every day. Okay, what do you say to that? How do you deal with that sort of delusion? And at that point, I was like, oh, this isn't as straightforward as I thought. You just be nice to people and everything would be wonderful.
Yeah, going back to my arrogant point, Salvat, I think the thing is I never had a proper job. By which, when I left university, so I worked in a shop and God knows what before that, but I went straight in as a management trainee. So my first job so I've never been a cashier. I've never been a process operative. I've never been a claims handler. I have never done a proper job. I have always been in management. If that makes sense, it's a very good perspective on things.
There's a load of people listening to this saying, like, I knew he never knew how to handle a claim. I knew he never understood how the job was really done.
Yeah, but they'd be right. Yeah. And I wouldn't be saying it, I was perfect, because I was far from perfect, but I was very lucky in the way that I was trained. But there were a couple of things that I did which are just...
Go on then. Tell me about some of those imperfections.
Well, so the one I remember very long, because it was about 22, 23, something like that. I was an assistant manager and I've got a team, 2 or 3 people working for me. And there's one guy called Ian, and he messed something up. I didn't know what he messed up, he had messed it up. But I just brought him into my office because I had an office at the time. And I just gave him a real bollocking. And halfway through this bollocking, I just thought, well, what are you doing this for, James? How do you think this is going to give you a good outcome? I'd seen people be bollocked elsewhere. I'd obviously picked it up from somewhere. But fortunately, I had the sense to go and apologise to him afterwards. And I think that is the only time I've ever bollocked somebody, because it's just not helpful.
Yeah.
But the other one, and I'm sure there are other occasions, but Anne, if you're listening, I do apologise for this. I made Anne cry.
Oh.
So this is when this was pretty much the start of email, and it was all, we had the conversation about intercompany mail. Do you remember those things used to do? So it was that age. And the organisation I worked for, it was quite a big thing. If you're going to write a memo, make sure it's just 1 page long, because people don't read memos more than 1 page. So Anne wrote this thing, and this thing was about 2.5 pages long. I said, Anne, you need to get it crisper sweet. You need to make it shorter. So she went away and made it shorter, and it came back and it was 1.5 pages long. No, you're not getting it. It needs to be a page long. If it's not a page long, nobody will read it. So she went away, and she was innovative. She reduced the font size, so she got it down to
that old chestnut.
Yeah, absolutely. So then, of course, I told her that was cheating. Of course, I got back to me that I'd made it cry. I just felt like such a heel for making this poor girl cry. But it's things like that. When it goes badly for you, that's when you realise, that it's not quite that straightforward, and you don't have the skills you need.
And I think that's the point, though, isn't it? Really, it's you didn't have this experience, which I appreciate. You'd have seen it lots of times. People who are really good at a job, you promote them to the next level up. And then you start managing people. And if you're a decent enough human, which a lot of us are, you're going to get on with well people. And then stuff happens. And it's when that stuff happens, you think, hang on a minute, I am woefully unprepared for this. And just fast forwarding a long while, another good example of that was I was managing one team, and one person who joined the team, we had massive problems with them. And I was trying to get the best job out of them, and I just couldn't. They literally hated me. And I had a guy who was doing some work with me at the time, who was doing some teamwork stuff. And he took me aside, said to me, you just need to be careful, because it's not within your capability to sort this person out. They need proper psychological help, as opposed to you're going to be able to coach them to be better. And it's stuff like that. Even when I was really experienced at managing people, you're still finding your limits, and you're finding stuff that you can't really deal with. And I think that's the challenge, is you get promoted, and what preparation do you have for this job?
So you've got 3 levels going on here. You've got managing a team or people to get an outcome.
Yeah.
You've got how do you manage people, which is what we get an awful lot of schooling on, and I'll start frothing about that shortly. But then you've got how do you manage individuals? And I think when you've got an individual who's got a real problem for whatever reason that might be, then you can get out of your depth very quickly.
Yeah.
And having the ability or the support structure around you of people who can help you, I think, is all important.
I had a nice graduation from managing like a small shop with 1 cashier to a bigger shop with a few, to a team of like half a dozen, 10. It is a different set of skills when you're talking about managing one individual, whether they got problems or not, versus teams. But I just found that the stuff that I'd learned that made me really good at doing the technical side of the job wasn't the
just
stuff
irrelevance. Yeah.
But that's how organisations think about it, isn't it?
Well, I think it's a structural issue, isn't it? Right. So people, the rewards technical competence.
Yeah.
And you quite often see very pointy-headed people in jobs which they shouldn't really have, because although it might be great if you're the world's best computer program or the best claims handler or whatever the hell it might be, it does not give you the skill to manage people.
No.
But I think it goes a bit more than that. It's, what did you say? I think you said once, management requires people judgment. So it's the ability to understand how people will respond.
Yeah.
And I had a boss once. He was quite cute. He said, managing people's like managing a group of people, a canoe where they're rowing down the Amazon, one of those log canoes.
Yeah.
You got 2 or 3 people at the front rowing like crazy, and keen and enthusiastic and wanting to get to wherever the hell it was. You've got 2 or 3 people at the bottom who just lying there with their hands in the water doing bugger all, and you've got 10 people in the middle. And he said, the trick is not to worry too much about the people at the back. You can't do anything about them. Just get shot. The question is, how can you get the guys in the middle who aren't giving it their all to start giving it their all? And so for me, it's not so much about managing people. It's about how do you create that environment where you get everybody to want to row as hard as you can. And that is the challenge.
I did work in one organisation where to get to a certain level in the organisation, you had to cycle through working in some of the operational teams, because the theory was that if you want to get to really senior levels in an organisation, You need people management, people leadership skill. And unless you've got that experience, you're not going to be able to do it. So yes, technical competence is what you get promoted on. If let's exaggerate, right? The governor of the Bank of England,
Yeah.
he needs technical competence in economics. That's got to be a given. But he is leading a big organization and he is managing a huge amount of processes and work that keeps the country's economy afloat. So if he was just a brilliant economist, we'd have a problem.
Well,
So I
but
think
that's really interesting you choose that example, because if you look and compare and contrast two managers, Donald Trump and Mark Carney. So Mark Carney, Canada, was the governor of the Bank of England for a while. But the one thing that comes through in spades is that Mark Carney understands the people who are around him, whereas Donald Trump really doesn't understand how people are going to respond. He's quite binary in his view of things. And so you're right, absolutely. Understanding how people are going to behave and why is all important.
So on to one thing where I think we have a different view on. The title of the episode was The Job No One Trains You For. But your view would be slightly different. So you were trained for that.
Yeah. So I was, and I had two types. Well, so my history, right? So I started as a management trainee. And in the first 2 years of my career, I worked for 6 different people. It was one job every 4 months. You move on and you move on and you move on. And actually, looking back at that was really very helpful, because it wasn't so much what I learned technically in those jobs. It was what I learned from watching the people who I was working for.
Yeah.
And there were two, three of those people who were really good, and 2 or 3 who were really bad. But that is actually, you learn a huge amount from watching people who were bad managers. But I had that experience. Yeah. So that was good. Then the next thing.
Sorry, just on that, James, that is, you're right. You can learn from working for lots of different people, but that was a very privileged experience.
Oh, I totally agree. Yeah.
Most people don't normally, you wouldn't get to see that within a couple of years, see all that different examples.
No, I totally agree. But I was very lucky. And then I got luckier still, because then I went and worked for a guy who was possibly the best manager I've ever worked for. And I worked for him for 6 years. Yeah. And people used to say, well, he's just a professional manager, by which they meant he just had this way of understanding how people were going to behave, what was important, and how to get the best outcome. And he was also very clear on the best outcome. So when I say I never had that experience, that is why, because that is what my background was. But when you talk about managing people, I hear people say, oh, he's a good people manager. And I just think, well, it's missing the flipping point. Because a lot of what we think about as people management is, are you good at setting smart goals? And have you been on the difficult conversations stuff? And it's all just very mechanistic. This is how you manage a human resource.
Yeah.
We've all had loads of that, but it doesn't teach you in how people behave or how people respond.
And I think that's the key, is for a lot of people, it's in at the deep end. Here's your team, here's your job, here's your shop, here's your whatever. And you crack on. And then I think you're right. When you get that training, the training is about the process of managing people, as opposed to, like your description of the best person you'd work for. It's understanding people. It's understanding the environment you're working in, and how do you create the right environment. And I think that when people talk about they're a good people manager, what they often just are is somebody who's quite personable and they get on well with people, and therefore they get a job out of them. That's slightly different from, actually, I've been trained to understand how people work and how the environment works. And I think that's where I think the training is missing there.
Yeah. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that, right? Well, so a lot of managers don't get it. I don't think if you're the type of guy who comes in and shouts and screams at people and bullies, and because you just don't get it. You don't get it. So how can you train people in something that you don't get? So that's the first thing. The other thing is, it's really bloody hard to codify. I mean, we'll go at codifying in a bit, but it's easy to say, well, this is how you write an Excel spreadsheet formula, because you can codify it. And but actually, how do you create an environment where people can do their best work? Bloody hell, that's a difficult thing to explain. And so, if you can't codify, it's very difficult to do training on it.
Yeah. And that picks up a theme from the last couple of episodes. We talked about what had we seen over the 100 episodes, and what we had seen was about the importance of the system you create and the complexity of humans in it. And then we talked to Paul Howley about transformation. And one of the things we're talking about there was that people revert to tech as an easy answer because actually, as you rightly say, humans are complex. So when you try and codify, how do I manage all the myriad of human reactions and emotions? Geez, you'd be there forever. Which is back to my point was even when I was a really experienced people leader, I was still finding the limits and I was finding the things I couldn't deal with the whole time. You know what I mean? Because it is such a complex subject. You can't boil it down easily.
And we get caught up as well, don't we? Because we talk about hard skills and soft skills. And your hard skills being the technical things. Can you write this legal jargon? Can you whatever the hell it might be? But the soft skills, the way in which you get on with people in the workplace, A, that's the really valuable stuff. And B, frankly, that's the hard bit. So although we recognize and value hard skills, it's the soft skills that really get you where you need to be.
Yes, no, I agree.
So you asked me, what did I have to do when I started working? What was my actual job?
Yeah.
All right, so I did start in a management job, but my job was I was a research and development manager. So it was a lowly research and development manager. It's all about innovation and ideas and seeing possibilities and having a bit of determination to make things happen. And that was who I was and what I did. But actually, that's all right until you're stuck in a factory at 4 flipping a.m. in the morning and it's freezing cold outside and you're trying to persuade people to have another go at pouring barbecue sauce over some more chicken burgers. So you're right, there's a very big difference between getting the most out of the people and the technical skills that you've got.
Our podcast is all about helping people, teams and organisations perform better and enjoy work more.
And I go as far as saying that we believe that everyone and every team has the potential to transform their performance by optimising what they currently do.
So if you'd like to discuss how we can help you transform your performance, then get in touch or maybe check out our website. We also do speaking events, mentoring and advice work as well. But I think that the point is whether you're learning about how to create the environment or learning from people who do this really well, I think it does come back to your openness and your ability to learn in the job. Because whether you're thrown in at the deep end or you have the privilege that you had in terms of the courses you did, you've still got always lots to learn. And if you're closed off to that, you're going to have a problem. And so I think now, even if you and I went back into working with people and leading people and managing organizations, we'd still find stuff that would be out of our depth.
And it's not, there's so much you have to be good at, right? So you might need to be good at coaching. Am I a good coach? Probably not. You might need to be good at conflict management. Well, I'll probably create more than I've ever managed. You know what I mean? Yeah. But I am good at being really clear about what needs to be done. And I'm good at making decisions. And I am good at, like I said, getting people the resources they need or creating that environment. So my point being, we've all got skills in this place, but none of us, I don't think, have got the perfect set of skills.
No, but I think being aware of the skills that you have and playing to your strengths. So another good example, James, you said, are you a very good coach? Well, I don't think I'm a very good coach. So I do more mentoring work than I do coaching now, because mentoring work, you can use your advice and you can guide people with your advice. Whereas coaching, you've got to have the patience and draw things out of people. And I don't have that. So I think it is a bit about what am I good at and play to your strengths. But if I take a step back to those early mistakes that you made with Anne and Ian, and I made a myriad as well, I guess that there were a few things that I found that I did consistently through the first few years of kind of managing people. I got promoted because I was a really good cashier. And then I carried on doing that on the side of doing my day job as well. So I wouldn't delegate my work. I'd just carry on doing it myself.
Really?
If it got busier, I'd work harder. And if I had somebody who was rubbish at their job, yeah, I know.
But you did get a bit frothy if they weren't doing their job properly, would you?
Yeah. And you avoid the difficult conversation. You don't say to somebody, actually, you're not doing a good enough job. I'm having to serve all the customers. Because as a shop manager, your job was to manage a shop, but also you were there to serve the customers. So you could do all the work yourself. And you didn't tackle those things head on. And they start off as a little irritation. They become a massive issue if you don't. They're like mushrooms. They grow in the dark. If you don't air your air your problems, they just grow and grow. So I think there was loads of things that I did early on in my career that I look back on, I think, oh, just should have sharpened up on those, without a doubt. What about you, James? What could you tell us from the Ian and Anne? What were the common mistakes that you made then?
I think for me, it was probably a lack of empathy, understanding what people were going through. Yeah, I think that probably would be the biggest thing, would be my problem. Yeah. So not understanding what was driving people's behavior.
Yeah. No, but it's interesting though, James, that the mistakes I talked about in my early on in my career, and you maybe lacking empathy, I bet you if you went to the last team that we managed,
I said lacked empathy.
they would still say that some of those things are still there. So it might be different, it might be less, but there'd still be in existence.
So go on then. So what would you say, what would be the practical examples or the insights? What would you tell people? What do people have to do differently?
So I think we can divide some of the simple things that you can do differently into two blocks. One is about changes in how you think about things, so your mindset, and the other one is actual practical things that we might have touched on, but we can probably revisit.
Yeah.
So just on the first bit, in terms of shifts of mindset, I think back to that technical job to it's a different set of skills. You have to move from I'm the expert that knows everything to actually, to your point, my job here is to enable other people's performance. So I don't need to know everything. It's what am I doing and how am I thinking about that?
Yeah. But there's an interesting one here, right? Because most people think they have been promoted to be the boss. And by definition, being the boss is about bossing people about. What you've said there, and I totally agree with you, is that whole thing about the inverted pyramid. The further up the organization you go, the more your job is to support the people below you. So I totally agree that most managers just do not see that at all.
I think it is a really powerful change that you can make by changing that thinking. Also, leaving behind what made me great previously was this, therefore I just do more of that. When you shift to managing people, that doesn't apply anymore because, as we said, it's a different set of skills. I think another shift in how you think is you're there to just do and do more, to actually, how do you think about things? How do you decide? How do you make decisions? How do you set direction? How do you create purpose?
Well, sorry, that's the key word. I know we bang on about this all the time, but purpose, because your job as a manager is to decide where the hell we're going.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because if people don't know where they're going, don't be surprised if they're not going to get there.
No. And I think the third shift that you can make from a mindset perspective that will be helpful is going from thinking you have to have all the answers to actually asking questions. Back to the episode we did with Graham Rainbird, using the power of questions rather than think you have to be Noel. So I think there are some.
Well, sorry, let me just go on with that with an example then, because it is very much in today's day like using an AI.
Yeah.
Right. Because you've got this AI and give you all the answers to any flipping question you think of. The thing, it knows everything. But the skill is to be able to ask the right questions. It's so important.
I think there's also a funny irony about how the tech bros and the engineers of this world, who are not really renowned for understanding humans, call them prompts rather than questions.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting.
So you've got those mindsets. Let's just go through that. Expert to enabler, doing, deciding, and answers to questions.
Yeah. But on the practical side of things, though, I think one of the key things you touched on many times, which you said bosses were very good at, was creating that clarity of expectation. What are you there for? What's the purpose? And if you can give people that real clarity about their sense of purpose and how their job fits in, I think that's one of the things that helps establish that overall system that we all work in. I think then another thing would be just have regular conversations with the people in your teams. How do you understand what's going on for them? How do you understand them as people? Also, how do you give them feedback? To my point about feedback being like mushrooms. If you don't deal with stuff early, problems just grow and grow. So give feedback early.
Well, actually, feedback works both ways. So there's a lovely story about firefighters. It was on the west coast of the States, and this woman actually did a study of different fires, and some fires people, got into control really quickly, And other fires had just gone horribly wrong and thousands of acres had burned down. And she tried to understand what was the difference. And the key thing was what the burn boss, is the correct name, is that what you do for your living? I'm a burn boss. I don't need to be a burn boss. But the good burn bosses, what they were really doing good at was walking around and talking to their people and understanding what was happening in their environment. Because, I don't know, the undergrowth could change, the geography could change, whether it was hilly or not, the wind could change direction. There are all sorts of things that could change. But just by getting that constant feedback from the people who were working for you, that's what made those successful burn bosses really good. So you're right, communication, all important. If you're going to lock yourself away in an office somewhere, you'll never get anywhere. But it does go both ways.
And in terms of going both ways, that can be one of the most powerful but most scary things you can do. Ask your team for feedback on how you're doing. Because otherwise you're in danger of creating the environment in the way that you think is right. Ask them questions.
Yeah, doing that, which are less, it sounds really threatening, doesn't it? Asking your team for feedback. But
it can be really scary.
It can be scary, but you don't have to counter the question that way. Yeah. What should we be doing different is a very different question from, tell me if I'm a good boss or not.
No, but yeah, you can talk in terms of how can I help you do a better job, as opposed to, do you like me? Am I a good boss? That's the point about thinking about the questions you ask, that you can couch the questions in a much more subtle way that force people to be less judgmental.
Yeah. What's really interesting is the answer to what can I do to help you is invariably leave me the fuck alone so I can get on with my job. Yeah. Or maybe get me this resource or whatever. But you go into it thinking, well, if I keep asking that, I'm just going to do the pile of work. You won't. It just shows that you're supporting people.
But that, I think, is another key practical behavior that people can pick up, is give people the space to deliver, the ownership of the things that they're meant to be delivering, but let them know that the support's there when they need it. So we touched on it in a previous episode. It's the kind of concept of being an umbrella of how do you keep the people dry and keep them being able to work.
Same time, though, it's pissing it down. Yeah, absolutely. Totally care.
And that's a great point, James, because quite often you put them in an umbrella, but you do go even further. You put them in a little bubble where they're protected. And I've worked with organizations, as you have, where, it's so protective. They don't actually realize it's pissing down. The reason they're not getting wet is because you're providing them with that support.
Yeah. Then anything else practically?
Well, I think the other thing is treat people like individuals. And sometimes we can get caught in everyone thinks the way I do and feels the way I do. And so therefore, if I do something that's logical and sensible to me, it's going to work for all of my team. That's not how it works. So understand people and treat them as individuals.
And that reminds me of another organization I worked for. I was working in a factory. I used to work for a boss called Bill. And Bill wasn't my boss. He was my boss's boss. Right? So Bill, intergalactic vice president of this organization. But whenever he walked through the factory, he'd always say, hello, James, how's it going? And he always had time for me.
Yeah.
But that very act meant that I would do anything for flipping Bill just because he knew what my name was. So just treat people as individuals, recognize them. You aren't that important because they'll go through walls for you.
As a leader, as a manager, whatever you want to call it, you cast a massive shadow over the people in your organization. It's a massive responsibility and privilege, and therefore you've got to treat it in that way. So I think we've touched on some key mindset shifts that you can make and some practical behaviors, but there are lots of ways that you can build this capability. And I think you touched on one of the key ones, which is observe people around you.
Well, and I think that's the most powerful. The real questions I've worked for we'll stop naming names, but some real tosspots. But actually, what do you learn from that person? Because my daughter worked for somebody in her first job and she really didn't like her at all. But I just said to her, well, this is really valuable. Don't be that person. You now know what not to do. And then what not to do is actually in many ways more valuable than knowing what to do. And coming back to my initial experience of work, the first 8 years of my life, I actually worked for a very good, well-run company. But then you expect everything is going to be well-run and done that way. And so you get into this sort of golden halo of, isn't this the world where the world is? I actually learned more by working for some absolute horrors after the event, because that's where you really learn how things shouldn't do. So observe, get the opportunity to work with lots of people and observe and say, what do I like about this person and what don't I like?
And I think there are lots of resources out there online that you can get help from outside of your company. But if you are being spoon fed some of the training that we talked about, it doesn't necessarily mean it's all bad. I think one of the key things about approaching any training is if you are going to spend time on it, either through your choice or because you've been sent on it, try and be open to what you can get from it, even if a lot of it is nonsense. So just to wrap things up then, James, tell me 3 things that you wish you'd known earlier in your career about managing people.
So the big one, I think, is people don't like to be controlled.
Right.
And I must have told you the parable about the sun and the wind. Have I told you this?
No, go
I'll
on.
repeat myself. So there's a bloke walking down the streets. He's got a coat on, and the sun and the wind have a bet. And the wind says, I bet you I can get that bloke's coat off. And the sun goes, yeah, okay, on you go. So the wind blew and blew as hard as he can, gale force 10. All the bloke did was just to pull his coat round him tighter. Yeah. So then the sun came out and just shone nice and bright, and the bloke got a little bit warm and took his coat off. So it really is, people don't like being controlled. So there you go. There's my best one, the sun and the wind. What have you got?
So my first one is it's back to that thing about technical expertise and just have a bit more humility, because your job is no longer to be the smartest person in the room. You no longer have to be the expert at everything. So just have the humility and start to learn.
Oh, that's an interesting one. So I'll pile on that one. And actually, if you think your job is to be the smartest person in the room and have a bunch of idiots around you, then you've got a useless team anyway. So that's really is a double whammy, that one.
Who said, if you find you're always the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room?
Oh, yeah, very good. So my second one then will be just realizing that people want to get on. And I'm sorry if I've told this story before, but the story of the cleaning lady got taken round this big offices in the West Midlands somewhere. And it was all about process improvement and what great job we could do with process improvement. And they took us to see the cleaning lady. And she was just on fire, right? She was, I get to order my own mops and I can choose which Dettol or disinfectant I want, and I can bish bosh bash. And I've got this trolley and I've designed my trolley so I can have the trolley where I want it. I see, because the thing is, I just want to bloody get on. But if the cleaning lady is that fired up and wants to get on, just imagine what you could do with the rest of your staff if you give them that opportunity. So there you go, people want to get on.
My second one is back to the difficult conversations. So when you have a difficult conversation, it's like a mushroom. If you keep it locked away in the dark, it will just grow and grow. They get harder the longer you leave them. So tackle some of the difficult conversations early on. Go on, what's your final one then, James?
Your job is not to manage your people. Your job is to create an environment where everybody can do their best work. That is your job. So don't obsess about the individual. Obsess about the environment you're creating.
And my final little bit would be really understanding the shadow you cast on your team. Your team are watching you and they react to you more than they often let on. So you've got this job. It's a responsibility and a privilege. So to treat it with the seriousness it deserves.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to lots of comments about me never being out of my depth. Poor deluded fool.
But who confessed that at the start of his career he lacked empathy, and at the end of his career he lacked empathy.
That'll be everything. But just imagine how painful I would be if I was truly perfect.
Instead of just believing you're perfect.
Yeah. Right. On that note.
Thanks, James. Thanks, everyone.
Speak to you later. Cheers now.
We cover a whole host of topics on this podcast,
from purpose to corporate jargon,
but always focused on one thing: getting the job done well.
Easier said than done. So if you've got unhappy customers or employees, bosses or regulators breathing down your neck,
if your backlogs are out of control and your costs are spiraling, and that big IT transformation project that you've been promised just keeps failing to deliver,
we can help. If you need to improve your performance, your team's performance, or your organisation's, get in touch at jimmy@ajobdonewell.com
or james@ajobdonewell.com.